Imagine starting a book with these words. I should know. I was an EHM. That immediately grabs you.
Right, it's powerful.
That's the opening from John Perkins. Okay, so let's unpack this. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the pretty extraordinary and frankly disturbing world laid out in John Perkins's Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah, what's really remarkable is how Perkins just pulls back the curtain on this global system. It looks like development aid on the surface, doesn't it?
Totally.
But underneath, he argues it's basically a new kind of exploitation, very sophisticated. He lays out this shadowy network using economics primarily to build and keep a global empire going. It's much more intricate than most people think.
And our mission for you today is really to get past those headlines. We want to help you understand the core EHM strategy, where it came from, how it's changed over time.
Including China's role now, which is huge.
Exactly. And what it all means for you today. It's about seeing the hidden mechanics, the gears of global power that are always turning. So, John Perkins. His path is pretty wild. Started out idealistic. Peace Corps, Ecuador, 1968, working with cooperatives in the Amazon. Young guy, 23, full of optimism. So how does someone like that end up, just a few years later, 1971, as chief economist at Maine, a big U.S. consulting firm?
Yeah, apparently recruited by an NSA executive he called Uncle Frank.
So what was this different world he got pulled into? And this clandestine training, how did that define what an economic hitman actually is?
That's where this woman, Claudine, comes in. His training with her was key. She basically laid out two main goals for his job.
Okay.
First, he had to justify these huge international loans. But the trick was, the loans were specifically set up to funnel money right back to U.S. corporations, think Bechtel, Halliburton, for massive infrastructure projects.
Ah, okay. So the money loops back.
Exactly. And the second goal, maybe even more insidious, was to basically bankrupt the countries receiving the loans.
How?
By loading them up with so much debt they couldn't possibly repay. That makes them totally dependent on their creditors.
And then vulnerable to demands.
Precisely. Suddenly, they're easier to pressure for things like military bases or maybe favorable votes in the UN, or critically, access to resources. Oil, especially oil.
So it's dependency disguised as aid.
That's the core of it.
Oh.
And the really clever part, these EHMs were private citizens, paid by corporations, not the government directly.
Plausible deniability?
You got it.
Yeah.
Makes it look like corporate dealings, not U.S. foreign policy.
And Perkins says it wasn't just about debt. He talks about these 4 pillars underpinning the strategy.
Yeah, the foundations. First is fear. Historically, military fear, then communism, now maybe terrorism, or even immigrants, he argues.
Okay, fear.
Second, debt. As we said, the main tool in his day. Third is anxiety over insufficiency, making people worry about not having enough. Food, housing, the basics.
Yeah, constant pressure.
And the fourth pillar, divide and conquer, pitting groups against each other so they can't unite and resist.
Looking at those 4, fear, debt, anxiety, divide, and conquer, which one feels like the real linchpin? Is it the debt?
That's a good question, because they definitely work together like legs on a stool. But I'd argue, yeah, debt was often the primary lever, especially in Perkins' time.
Because it creates that long-term trap.
Exactly, a structural dependency. Then the country's way more vulnerable to fear tactics or anxiety or being divided. And all these pillars, they prop up what Perkins calls the death economy.
The death economy. Explain that a bit.
It's an economic model focused purely on maximizing short-term profits, often without caring much about the social or environmental fallout.
Like a zero-sum game.
Pretty much. The idea that for someone to win, someone must lose. You see the echoes of Milton Friedman's ideas in there. It rewards things that don't actually produce much real value, like complex financial speculation.
Right.
Ignores pollution or social costs. Those are just externalities. It pushes towards monopolies. And crucially, it treats nature like it's just stuff to be used up, depletable.
And the alternative he proposes
is the life economy, the opposite. It aims to maximize long-term benefits for people and for nature, a win-win approach. It really makes you question the values driving our global economic engine.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the places Perkins actually worked. Those specific tactics during that first wave, the U.S.-led one. Beyond just the numbers, what about the human side? Did he have moments that showed how locals saw what he was doing?
Oh, absolutely. His first big assignment, Indonesia, 1971. He talks about intense pressure from his bosses. They needed these super optimistic forecasts for electricity demand, like 17, 19% growth per year. Totally unrealistic.
Just to justify bigger loans.
Exactly. Inflate the loan size. He mentioned an older colleague, Howard, who flat out refused. said it was unconscionable to cook the numbers.
Did Perkins push back?
Not initially. He complied, but his conscience started nagging him. He described seeing child laborers, people bathing in these awful slime-green canals. He felt miserable, he said, even though he had all the perks, the trappings of success.
And you mentioned a cultural experience.
Yeah, it's a really striking scene. A shadow puppet show in Bandung. He sees puppets representing President Nixon as an Uncle Sam figure, literally throwing puppets of Middle Eastern countries, Palestine, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, into a trash can, shouting things like, "Muslim dogs, Islamic devils."
Whoa! How did the audience react?
Outrage. Total outrage. And that's when Perkins realized many local leaders hated his guts. They'd introduce him using Indonesian words that meant inquisitor or interrogator.
So they saw him not as a helper, but as something else.
They absolutely did. Then, moved to Panama in 1972, he meets President Omar Torrijos. Perkins describes him as really charismatic, a leader fiercely fighting for Panama to control the Canal Zone. He called it U.S. colonialism.
And Torrijos also objected to the School of the Americas, that training ground for dictators.
Yes, exactly. He was pushing back on multiple fronts, which raises the question,
Yeah.
how far would the system, the corporatocracy, as Perkins calls it, go to shut down leaders like Torrijos who challenged the narrative?
Did Torrijos succeed with the canal?
He did, eventually. Negotiated new treaties with President Carter in '77 to hand over control. But Perkins notes, conservatives back in the U.S. swore revenge. Ominous.
Okay, then Saudi Arabia, 1974. This one sounds different. The Sama Saudi Arabian money laundering affair.
Yeah, this was a unique EHM setup, not the usual loan model. It involves something called J-Corps, the U.S. Saudi Arabian Joint Economic Commission.
What did it do?
Basically, it managed Saudi oil money, their petrodollars. That money was then used to hire American companies for huge modernization projects in Saudi Arabia.
So the U.S. firms got paid directly with Saudi money.
The deal was the U.S. gets stable oil supplies at decent prices, and the House of Saud gets U.S. political and military backing. Perkins quotes a vice president saying it was the cow we can milk until the sun sets on our retirement.
Grim. And Perkins had a controversial role there, too.
He did. He describes what he calls his sordid role in arranging certain personal services, basically, for a high-ranking prince. He explicitly calls it pimping, exploiting women with few options.
Jeez. That shows the depths of the moral compromise.
Absolutely. And that whole Samajek Corps thing apparently set some precedents, like Idi Amin getting asylum in Saudi Arabia later. Plus, Perkins hints at connections to powerful families, even threads leading towards pre-9/11 al-Qaeda funding. It's complex.
Wow. Okay, next stop. Iran, 1977. The Shah was a major U.S. ally then.
He was. Projects like Flowering Desert. But Perkins met these two figures, Yamin and this advisor called Doc, who had been disfigured. They revealed this deep, boiling hatred for the Shah among ordinary Iranians, blaming U.S. policy, corrupt leaders, the Shah's despotic rule. Doc actually predicted the Shah would fall soon, and that companies like Perkins' firm, Maine, would lose big time. The Shah fled in '79, the hostage crisis followed. Perkins wrote that the U.S. was just laboring to deny the truth of our role in the world, a painful realization.
Finally, Colombia, 1977. What happened there?
He met an activist, Paula. She showed him the human cost of these big dam projects, indigenous people, farmers, losing their land, and how are they treated?
Let me guess. Branded as terrorists.
Communist terrorists, exactly, just for defending their homes. This is where Perkins learned about the Colombians are expendable doctrine.
What was that?
A U.S. rule forbidding American citizens from going to dangerous project sites. It just reeked of this xenophobic attitude, like Colombian lives didn't matter as much.
Horrible.
Paula explained how some guerrillas, feeling desperate, got training in Russia or China and started selling cocaine to buy weapons. They felt their fight was just. It hit Perkins hard. He remembers thinking, oh, Paula, I detest myself for playing this role. He saw it clearly then. A new, highly subtle form of imperialism.
You can see how the guilt just built and built. He compared himself to slavers. That's intense.
It led directly to his resignation from Maine, April 1st, 1980. He just couldn't do it anymore.
But challenging the system wasn't without risk. You mentioned Roldos in Ecuador and Torrijos in Panama.
Exactly. Just a year later, 1981, both President Roldos of Ecuador and General Torrijos of Panama died in plane crashes. Both had recently challenged powerful U.S. economic and political interests.
And Perkins links these deaths, suggests they weren't accidents.
He presents them as extremely suspicious, yes. Coming so soon after their defiance, it strongly implies a darker side. That if economic pressure didn't work, maybe more permanent solutions were considered to silence opposition.
So he leaves Maine, but the past still follows him.
Very much. He starts an alternative energy company, IPS. Ironically, he admits it succeeded partly because of his old connections, his past services to the corporatocracy.
Wow.
But the guilt remained. He worried constantly about the world his daughter would inherit. He tried to write it all down in 1987, a book called Conscience of an Economic Hitman.
What happened?
He was pressured to stop, offered a lucrative consulting contract, basically a bribe, on the condition he didn't write about anything political or his work with international banks. He took the deal, stayed silent for years.
That control of the narrative seems key, like the U.S. invasion of Panama in '89.
Right. Officially, it was about removing Manuel Noriega, painted as this depraved dictator.
But Perkins suggests other motives.
He points out Noriega was also defying the U.S. over the Canal Treaty implementation, and crucially, was talking to Japanese companies about potentially building a new competing canal. So how much was it about drugs and dictatorship, and how much about protecting U.S. economic and strategic interests, even if it meant invading another country against international law? That's the question Perkins forces you to ask.
So that brings us closer to today. Perkins argues the EHM strategy didn't disappear, it just evolved. New waves emerged.
Yeah, the second EHM wave. This really took off after 9/11, he says. And the big shift. These tactics started being used inside the U.S. and other wealthy countries.
How did that look, bringing it home?
Think about the blatant financial corruption. Bankers rigging huge markets like LIBOR for interest rates or foreign currency exchanges. Billions in fines paid by the banks, sure.
But no one went to jail.
Exactly. Not a single high-level banker indicted for criminal charges related to the 2008 crisis, for example. Perkins notes this kind of public apathy, this resignation to being exploited. It felt disturbingly similar to what he'd seen in countries crippled by debt.
And the revolving door between government and lobbying.
Oh, yeah. High-ranking politicians he names like Senators Daschle, Dodd leave office and immediately become highly paid corporate lobbyists, pushing policies that benefit the corporatocracy. Huge subsidies, too, like $68 billion in federal grants and tax credits over 15 years, mostly going to massive corporations like Ford, GE.
While others use loopholes.
Right. Companies like Walmart setting up complex webs of offshore tax havens to avoid paying billions in taxes. And then you have the vulture capitalists.
What do?
They buy up the debt of struggling countries for pennies on the dollar, then aggressively sue them in court to recover the full face value plus interest. It can cripple already poor nations.
And the methods evolve too, beyond just economics.
Definitely. Perkins calls them the modern jackals. Think drones, widespread domestic surveillance by the NSA and CIA, the use of private military contractors, mercenaries.
Again, plausible deniability.
Always. Plus, actions that were once unthinkable domestically, like imprisonment without habeas corpus and assassination, become part of the toolkit.
Okay, so that's the second wave. Now the third EHM wave. This sounds like a major global shift, China.
It is. This really started emerging in the early 2000s, China's own EHM strategy. And it represents a huge shift in global power, moving away from military dominance towards economic dominance.
How does China's playbook compare to the U.S. one Perkins described? Is it just a copy?
Not exactly. There are key differences, though the end result, creating dependency, can be similar. China's big push is the New Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, massive infrastructure projects globally.
Okay, so infrastructure loans like the U.S. model.
Yes, but with a twist. China's debt pillar comes with a promise of non-interference in a country's internal politics. That's a big contrast to this bank approach, which often demands specific policy changes, the Washington Consensus.
That sounds better on the surface.
It can be appealing, yes. China also tends to let local officials decide on the projects. The downside: this opens the door wide for corruption, with local elites often getting rich off the deals. And China usually insists that Chinese companies, Chinese workers, and Chinese materials are used.
So the jobs and profits still flow back to China?
Largely, yes. Look at Ecuador again. After rejecting the conditions tied to Western loans, they turned to China for billions to build hydroelectric dams. Fewer political strings attached, seemingly, but still creating massive debt and dependence.
Is there a philosophical difference too?
Perkins suggests there might be. He notes China's approach is sometimes framed through Confucian ideals serving the family, the community, looking towards future generations, rather than just individualistic short-term greed. It allows them to present their state-controlled market economy differently.
And they're building their own financial institutions.
Absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
The BRICS Bank, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. These offer alternatives to the World Bank and IMF, which gives countries more leverage and options. It fundamentally challenges the U.S.-dominated financial architecture
And we see the results, China's influence growing.
massively. Trade dominance expanding rapidly across Asia, but also Africa, Latin America. Argentina is a key example. There are significant concerns.
Like what?
Well, China's own authoritarian government, obviously. Reports of shoddy engineering on some Belt and Road projects, widespread corruption, like a huge highway project in Montenegro that created unsustainable debt, and accusations of blatant resource plundering in some countries.
And just like the U.S. system, they use hired guns, former politicians lobbying for them.
Yep. Perkins points to former U.S. politicians Ed Royce, David Vitter, Treadlop people who maybe once criticized China fiercely, now lobbying for Chinese companies. It perfectly illustrates what Claudine told Perkins years ago. Your best asset is the politician who speaks strongly against you and then joins you. The game continues, just with new players and slightly different rules.
So wrapping this up, we've journeyed through Perkins' confessions, the mechanics of the EHM strategy, how it started, how it morphed into these different waves involving the U.S. internally, and now China's rise. It really paints this stark picture, doesn't it? This contrast between that death economy model
Driven by short-term profit, exploitation,
and the potential, at least, for a life economy focused on long-term health for people and the planet.
and the crucial question Perkins leaves us with is, how do we as individuals actually navigate this? How can we push things towards that life economy? He doesn't just diagnose the problem, he offers some ideas for action.
Right, drawing from his own experiences. He suggests tackling those 4 pillars directly in our own lives. For fear, use social media, connect across cultures, tell stories of courage, not just fear.
Makes sense.
For debt, encourage ourselves and others to avoid crushing personal debt. And demand systemic change, like relief for student loans or unfair credit card practices.
To combat anxiety over insufficiency.
Advocate for basics, universal health care, good education, actual living wages, things that provide security.
And divide and conquer.
Insist on teaching real, diverse histories in schools. Promote cooperation, understanding between groups, not conflict.
And he really emphasizes consumer power, doesn't he? The idea that our choices collectively matter.
Hugely. He suggests something really direct. Email CEOs, tell them straight up, I won't buy your products until your company stops polluting, or until you pay fair wages overseas.
Sounds simple, but does he think it works?
He argues that if enough people do it, if it goes viral, creates a buzz. It builds critical mass. That pressure actually empowers CEOs who want to do better. It gives them leverage with their own boards and investors. They can say, look, this isn't just PR. It's hitting our bottom line. We have to change. It makes ethical behavior a business necessity.
Turning ethics into a market force.
Exactly. So the final thought, drawing from Perkins himself, his grandmother apparently taught him to face huge global problems, not with despair, but with hope, faith, courage, and action.
Hope, faith, courage, and action.
So the question for you listening right now is, what specific action, guided by that hope and courage, will you take? How will you help pilot our collective spaceship Earth away from the destructive path of the death economy and towards a more regenerative, life-affirming one?